Hi, we are now on the fats and oils chapter, and this one is going to possibly seem a little overwhelming based on the length of the assignment, but do not panic. You are about to be over one of your biggest hurdles by completing the 3 macronutrient chapters. If you're doing well so far, you're going to be just fine here. It's going to seem like more than it really is when you look at the document, but you're gonna be fine. So hear me out here and then go back and review the things I point out in the text, and I think that you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how well equipped you feel moving forward from this point. So you're going to see in a different format the functions of fat in the body outlined in your text, but I think that common sense tells us it can supply energy. It obviously is a caloric nutrient, right? So you know that there are 9 calories in a gram of fat, twice as much in essence as is in carbohydrate or protein. A, D, E, and K are vitamins. They are referred to as fat-soluble vitamins because they dissolve in fat in our body, which allows us to store them in our body, unlike other vitamins such as B and C, which are water-soluble and therefore easily dissolved and excreted from our body. So ADEK is a word, A-D-E-K, in alphabetical order. And if you can remember ADEK, you'll always be able to remember the fat-soluble vitamins. Obviously, you are going to get fat-soluble vitamins from foods that contain fat because they are dissolved in that fat as well, right? This is going to be relevant later, which is why I want to emphasize it now. We all know that on our body we have fat. What's that called? Adipose tissue, right? And so we obviously have energy reserves in that fat, and that is where we are going to store ADEK. There are a lot of roles of fat. They have to insulate us, control temperature. Hey, everything's bumping around inside of you if you don't have any cushioning, right? Healthy skin, hair, nails, all of your normal cell growth for all of these different tissues. And of course, there are other functions of fat, such as the flavor component in food and making it have a great mouthfeel and palatability, giving things a richness. And it creates a greater sense of satiation or satiety. So you heard about balance in chapter 1, but maybe this part hasn't really sunk in yet. When we speak of balance, we don't just mean balance in the whole diet, we mean balance at a meal. So if somebody has mostly carbohydrates, but not also fat and protein, their meal is imbalanced. If they have mostly protein, but no carbohydrate or fat to some degree, it's not balanced. So balanced meals have a balance of the macronutrients, and ideally those are coming from foods that are rich in water and micronutrients, hence comprehensive dietary balance. So if you don't want to be hungry, you have to make sure there's some fat in your meals, as well as some protein and some carbohydrate. So this is what a lipocyte looks like, a fat cell in the body. And so when you're looking at that yellow portion, which is the internal segment because they've cut this away, here's what I want you to plant in your mind. Those are just little balls of triglycerides, because triglycerides are the molecular structure of fat. By and large, the most predominant structure when we speak of fat in food or fat in the body. So there are a couple of other lipid or fat structures that we look at, but they are very small in quantity and presence compared to triglycerides. So what would you get if you sliced open an adipose cell, a lipocyte, a fat cell? You would get a bunch of triglycerides. So in food, we have to appreciate the value of fat because things would be dry and crumbly and not very flavorful if it weren't for fat. So it improves the quality of our food because it makes things moist and rich. I believe it's mentioned in your text, and maybe you've heard this before, that one of the tips for low-fat cooking is that, say you wanted to make a baked good, which inherently probably isn't the most healthful choice, but you're trying to cut back a little bit and compromise. So one effective tool is to take the fat out. Well, that might be the butter or the shortening or the oil, and to use something moisture-rich in its place, like applesauce or pureed prune. The idea is that both add fiber, they give moisture, but let's face it, they're still not fat, right? So you would notice a textural difference, and that the baked good would definitely be crumblier and drier. So flavor is a big component, because biologically when we taste fat, it is something that's appealing to us, and it makes us want to eat more. And we have all of these amazing survival mechanisms in place that have helped us endure as mankind throughout eons, right? And those drives to want to eat things that we find delicious are what has helped ensure that when we have encountered food sources, we have partaken of them liberally, so that we would store up reserves for those periods when we are not able to access food as readily as needed. So when you're looking at meats in the store, one thing that you may not know is that the more expensive meat is the less healthful meat. Well, why is that? Because the most desirable meats from a culinary standpoint, a food service standpoint, are those with the most marbling, the prime grades, and just below that the choice grades. Well, logically, that's because it gives it more fatty moisture, right? It makes it more tender. It makes it more flavorful. The leaner cuts, like the select cuts, are going to be a little bit tougher. That means that you have to prepare them a little differently. Sometimes they have to be slow roasted, or they have to be what we call braised, which means that you put it in a pot with some sort of liquid and a tight fitting lid and cook it slowly so that it tenderizes the meat. So the good news is, once again, that healthier eating is not so expensive, because when you buy the less expensive cuts of meat, they are inherently those with less of that fat, and the type of fat that's in meat, excess of it is potentially a concern for many of us. So another tactic is to eat less meat in general, even if you want to eat the fattier meat, right? So that's kind of a personal decision. So you're going to see in your book as you read that we have these structures called fatty acids, and I often refer to them as fatty acid chains because that's literally what they are. You can see that these are chains, and they are of varying lengths. So what are those dots? Well, hopefully as you look at your book, it will make sense that they are carbon molecules, as signified by a C+ sign if you've taken chemistry. So carbon chains of various lengths: short chain, medium chain, and long chain fatty acids. Now, it's a bit beyond the scope of this basic level course. Remember, this is one course, and nutrition is an entire field of study to get into all the different chain lengths. But I will say this, that there is a lot of controversy in the media and through different dietary approaches that are highly promoted by certain people and groups these days over whether or not certain types of fat are better or worse for your health. And the type that we have historically told people to be cautious about is the saturated fat. And that is because we know that the way that it behaves in the body is often unfavorable in many respects. However, there are those who say, oh, that's not true, butter's back. Well, not exactly. That's kind of taking a leap from A to Z. What we are starting to better understand is that different chain links behave differently. So even if it's a less than healthful fat as a general rule, some less than healthful fats are more or less healthy or unhealthy than others. That is a mouthful, right? And that's why we're not going to dig that deeply. ultimately, in the big picture perspective, if we are limiting the types of foods that are most apt to contain the fats that we know are most associated with health problems, then inherently by limiting, not avoiding, but limiting those things, it kind of all comes out in the wash. So as you look in your book, you're going to see from a visual standpoint that those dots that make up that chain once again are carbon atoms, and that they have bonds, that's the little lines there, that connect them to hydrogen atoms. Now you're going to see that they are most often single bonds, but sometimes they are double bonds. And the nature of how a fatty acid functions is largely determined by its bonds. What you will find is that when there are double bonds, there usually is not an H. Well, the H, as you can see, are hydrogen. So we are speaking in terms of fatty acid chains being more or less saturated with hydrogen. Picture a sponge. You dunk it into a bucket and you pull it out. It's saturated with water, right? It's full of water. So if a fatty acid chain is full of hydrogen atoms, it's holding all that it can hold, then it is saturated. The more hydrogens on the chain attached to carbons, the greater the degree of saturation. The fewer hydrogen atoms, the lesser the degree of saturation. So when something is fully saturated with hydrogen, we call it a saturated fatty acid chain. And when it is missing any hydrogen, we call it an unsaturated fatty acid chain. This will become easier. Now, what I have here is a larger, slightly different structure. This is where you see, if I go back here for a moment, these fatty acid chains are now the blue and orange. What are they attached to? Well, there are three of them, attached to the blue backbone, the glycerol backbone, hence triglyceride, right? And so the blue are the carbon atoms on the chains, and the orange balls are the hydrogens. And again, there are different chain links. So if we look at a fully saturated chain versus the two different types of unsaturated fatty acid chains, what you see is those which are unsaturated are the ones with some double bonds. The relevance of that, as your book explains, is that where there's a double bond, it's missing a hydrogen. It is less saturated. So if there are points missing hydrogen, we call them points of unsaturation. And if any points of unsaturation exist, we term that chain to be an unsaturated fatty acid chain. If there's one point, then mono means one, so it's a monounsaturated chain. If there are multiple points, poly means multiple or many, it is a polyunsaturated chain. So remember, there's always going to be three of these attached to a glycerol backbone. We're just examining the different structures of a single chain from a visual standpoint. So as you look here, you can see the acronyms that we use. Monounsaturated is a MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid. Polyunsaturated fatty acid is a PUFA. So we usually in healthcare speak in terms of MUFAs and PUFAs, and we write it that way because who wants to say or write monounsaturated fatty acid or polyunsaturated fatty acid? Phew. Another visual for you. Now, if you will notice, the saturated fatty acid chain forms a straight line. In other words, it's very rigid, right? And if you look at the others where there are points of unsaturation, they are more flexible. Look at the middle one. For lack of a more clinical term, it's very bendy, right? So you can see that there's flexibility there. The bottom one is similarly flexible. Where those spaces are, it could bend. So anything that has the ability to be more flexible is going to be softer, and something more rigid is going to be harder. So the foods that contain higher concentrations of saturated fatty acid chains as part of their triglyceride structure, and again you see triglyceride images, those are going to be the fatty foods that are more solid at room temperature. And those that are more bendy, those that are more unsaturated, are going to be softer or even liquid. This, I think, is a wonderful visual. You might want to hit pause and kind of sketch this out in your notes, because I think it's a really good way to keep things straight in your head. So we're looking at fatty acid chains, the 3 chains that attach to a glycerol backbone and make up a triglyceride. And those structures, those triglycerides, can be composed of saturated fatty acid chains or unsaturated fatty acid chains. And I'll talk briefly a little bit later about trans fats, but here's a cool thing. You really don't have to think about them much anymore because we're trying to get them out of our food supply. But let me just tell you this. A trans fat, and this should make complete sense, is usually a man-made structure. It was made in a laboratory, and man took some unsaturated fatty acids and stuck some hydrogens into those points of unsaturation, thereby converting that unsaturated fatty acid chain into a saturated fatty acid. In other words, they transformed it from unsaturated into saturated, hence trans fat. So again, your unsaturated fatty acid chains that comprise your triglyceride molecular structure are either MUFAs or PUFAs. And there are a couple of types of PUFAs that we want to pay close attention to, which are the omega fatty acids. Specifically, we have a lot of interest in omega-3. Omega-6s are abundant in plant foods and plant oils. We easily get what we need. The omega-3s, however, tend to be present in foods that most of us in this country don't consume very often, and therefore we tend to fall short. So I want to point something out to you because I think that it's important from a clinical standpoint, and I have found in many years of practice that this is not common knowledge for healthcare professionals, much less laypersons. So you will see in your book the discussion about the omega-3s and omega-6s. Chances are you have heard of people buying fish oil caplets or algal oil caplets, usually fish oil. Most people will go out and buy fish oil because they heard it's good for them. Sometimes people are told by a physician or dietitian to buy fish oil, although most of the time when it's a professional, at least a dietitian, we oftentimes recommend particular brands or product lines because we know more about them and know they're reliable. Doctors don't necessarily always know that. Oftentimes they will say buy the least expensive one, which is still very quite possibly fine. The problem is you have to know how to read the nutrition facts panel once again. So on a supplement like fish oil, when you look at the top, it tells you the serving size, just like with food. Now, when you look at the line that says omega-3 fatty acids, it's telling you the total cumulative amount. The EPA and DHA are 2 different types of omega-3 fatty acids. We want a combination of both. So the therapeutic dose, the dose which is beneficial for somebody if this is an appropriate supplement for them, and oftentimes it's used as a blood thinner to help blood flow better. A standard dose for a person who has not been prescribed it but is taking it proactively, and there are harms associated with that, so hopefully those people are asking clinical professionals like doctors or dietitians or nurses if it's a good idea. For those for whom it is appropriate, we want them to usually get at least 500 milligrams a day. So you can see that one capsule will have 230, so they're going to have to take 2 to 3 capsules. Most people don't know that. They're going to look at the serving size and take one, and they're not benefiting at all. Now, what if I, as a registered dietitian, know that you would truly benefit from this for the blood thinning effect due to your cardiovascular disease status, and that the therapeutic or medicinally appropriate dose is going to be at least 1,000. Now look how many tablets you have to take. So what I would do is tell someone to buy a product that I know myself has a higher concentration of EPA and DHA, omega-3 fatty acids, in a singular capsule so that they don't have to take so many. And there aren't that many on the market that are going to have a high concentration in one capsule. Why do you think that is? Because too much is dangerous. And most people have a tendency to either not pay attention to what they're taking or think more is better. So the higher quantity of omega-3 fatty acids in a capsule is going to be rare in a store. It oftentimes is going to be a prescription grade dose, and there are actually some brand names of prescription grade fish oil for that very reason. You're only allowed to get a hold of them through a prescription because that way there is a clinician who knows you're taking them and can monitor you to make sure that they don't have adverse effects. So they could cause somebody's blood to be too thin so that if they injured themselves and began bleeding externally or internally, they could not stop bleeding, as well as the fact that there are potentially contaminants in some of the products, and other concerns. All right, take a breather. Now, your book explains to you that there are 3 primary lipid structures that we are focused on. Triglycerides. We've now reviewed those. You know that triglycerides are a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acid chains, and that those chains can either be unsaturated or saturated, so we just call them either saturated fats or unsaturated fats. The other 2 lipid forms your book introduces you to are cholesterol and phospholipids. So let's talk a minute about this. Say it differently and it will stick better in your head. Try it this way. Cholesterol. In other words, cholesterol is a type of sterol, and sterols are one of the 3 lipid structures. Cholesterol, cholesterol, is produced intrinsically within the livers of all animals. What's a person? An animal. Therefore, our liver produces cholesterol. In fact, it produces all we need. And for some people, that's a problem because there may be a genetic abnormality such that their cells of their liver overproduce cholesterol. And so there's really nothing that that person can do if they're genetically overproducing other than take a prescription medication that's designed to stop the liver production of that sterol. So let me say this if you don't know this or if it's not clear yet. The liver is your central processing facility for all of the fats or lipids in your body. So when you eat your foods, and as you know, they digest down into their component parts, then those triglycerides that were in your foods obviously have been broken apart. The glycerol backbone has been ripped away from each of the 3 fatty acid chains, which have also been pulled apart. And all of those molecules are transferred to your cells in your liver. And your liver cells say, hey, let's put the puzzle back together this way or that way. So triglycerides are being produced in your liver from the remnants of the triglycerides that were in your food. And at the same time, your liver is producing sterols like cholesterol. So again, all fat production or synthesis is taking place within the liver before it's released out into your bloodstream, your arteries, and your capillaries subsequently. So let's think about this. What if Bob has a genetic propensity for overproducing cholesterol? Well, his physician can prescribe him a medication, but it's going to be like playing tug of war if Bob has a diet that is also high in cholesterol? Well, where is he going to get dietary cholesterol? From foods of animal origin, because those animals had a liver. So meat and dairy or other products that contain their ingredients, right? So eggs, meat, milk, yogurt, cheese, all these things contain cholesterol. And let's back up. How much cholesterol do you need from food? None, right? Because your body makes all the cholesterol it needs. That means the moment you consume cholesterol-containing food, you have taken in excess cholesterol. Now, for years, we have not been certain how much cholesterol was appropriate. In other words, what should the tolerable upper limit be? And it's been set pretty conservatively, in other words, pretty low for a long time because we were erring on the side of caution. In the past few years, there's been a lot of disagreement over what that TUL should be, and many people feel that it could be much higher and it would be fine, and that's quite possibly true. But there's a caveat. How do we know for who it can be much higher? Because we're all very different, you see. What if my liver is already overproducing cholesterol? Then my tolerable upper limit from food may be lower than yours. And what if genetically you just have a higher tolerance than I do, even though neither one of us overproduces it in our liver? So there's no way to personalize this information, and that's why we use blanket dietary guidance as generalizations. And we recommend that people limit their cholesterol intake. We do have a TUL, and that's why we can look at the nutrition facts label and we can seek out foods with 5% or less, or we can consciously make an effort to focus mostly on plants in our diet, with animals being a small portion of our intake to be on the safe side. What we know is that cholesterol, being a lipid, is one more lipid structure that has the potential to form plaques in our vessels, and we're going to be studying that more. Now let's talk a bit about the phospholipids. So these are different than the other two in several ways. First of all, there are only two fatty acid chains, and secondly, there is a unique portion called phosphate. That's PHOS. PHATE, right? And so not only is the structure different from sterols and triglycerides, but additionally, this is not something we're going to be focused on in terms of our diet. This is internally a component of our body. So we're not talking about how much phospholipid is in your food, right? This is a whole category unto itself. So as you look at this image at the bottom, this is a cutaway section of a body cell, and all of your trillions of cells have a membrane. On the inside there is water, intracellular fluid, and they are all floating in the extracellular fluid of your body. So if you look here, the yellow layer is showing you the tails, these two little squiggly lines in the upper left-hand corner, all pointing towards that intermediary layer of your cell membrane, and the orange dots correspond with the blue dot in the upper left-hand corner, or the matching orange ones on the right side. So as you look at the image in the upper right corner, that most closely resembles what you're seeing. And what you see is that the fatty acid chains, the yellow squiggly lines, are all on the inside. They're not where the water is on either the inside or outside of the cell, right? They're all pointing toward the inside of the membrane. And that's because fats don't mix with water. Fatty acids don't mix with water. But phosphate is water friendly. So hydrophobic, phobic being afraid of something, are what fatty acids are. They're afraid of water. They don't mix with water. Hydrophilic means water friendly. So the phosphate portion is able to butt up against the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, and you ultimately end up with this bilayer, or the cellular membrane, made up largely of phospholipids as well as other lipid components as well. Pretty cool if you can understand this. And this is about as simple as we can make it. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between the types of fats in foods and which ones are better or worse and why. You now understand that there are mono and polyunsaturated fatty acid chains that comprise triglyceride structures, and that triglycerides are what most of your food fats are. So we know that those which are less saturated, those which are unsaturated, are more favorable to our health for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is that they produce less internal inflammation, and inflammation is a driver for any number of diseases. Another reason is that they're less likely to be packaged into the vesicles that tend to form plaques in our blood vessels. The bad fats, those are which more saturated, doesn't mean we can't have any. It means we have a tolerable upper limit. The excess is what's most likely to get us in trouble because they promote more internal inflammation and cellular damage, and they are more likely to be culprits in the formation of plaques within our blood vessels. So when you think in terms of those which are less healthful, the saturated fats, while there are some exceptions to the sources, there are some plant sources, even though by and large most plant fats are unsaturated. Palm and coconut are odd exceptions. They're more saturated. So think about that. If you've ever seen a container of coconut oil, it's not actually oil. It's solid, like the picture here where you see the word fat. It's more like lard or bacon grease, right? That's how you know it's more saturated. Remember that rigid structure. I like to sum things up for people I deal with by saying, here are the problems, the things you seriously need to limit: sweets, treats, and greasy meats. I always say the 3 eats are what get us in trouble: sweets, treats, and greasy meats. And if you look here, you see sweets, treats, and greasy meats all over the place, right? French fries count as a treat. Hopefully fried chicken counts as a treat, but it's also a greasy meat. You start to get a sense of things. When we speak in terms of those which people like to call the healthy fats, again, we're talking about the more unsaturated fats, the muffas and the puffas. Nuts, all kinds of nuts. Now, here's something you want to remember. Peanuts aren't really nuts. Peanuts are actually a type of legume, a bean. We just use them the way we use nuts. In food, when we speak of nuts, we actually mean tree nuts, almonds, pecans, cashews. So peanuts are a legume, and they actually do contain healthy fats. So I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just clarifying what we mean when we say nuts as a rule. We also hear a lot about salmon and tuna and mackerel and herring and sardines, and of course the unsaturated oils like the canola oil and the olive oil, and then obviously olives, hence that's where olive oil comes from. And a lot of times people are focused on things like flaxseed and chia seed. An interesting tidbit that you want to file away mentally, what a lot of people don't realize is that most of those small seeds like flaxseed or chia seed, they have to be ground up before you use them. Part of that is because the valuable components you're seeking, the healthy fats, omega-3 and otherwise, are contained within the husk, right? And so when we put these small seeds into foods or on foods and then we eat them, they're so small that we often don't masticate them. So they never get ground in our mouth. We swallow them whole and they just pass through as insoluble fiber and we get no benefit. So they've got to be masticated, and if they're so small that you can't chew them all up in your mouth easily, the idea is to do that before you put them in the food, to grind them up. So I think this visual, if you maybe want to hit pause and kind of take it all in, or if you want to print this slide for your benefit, is a good one. Again, the trans fats are not so much of an issue anymore because current legislation that took effect as of 2018 is that we are no longer to have trans fats in our food supply. Now, it's important for me to mention, as your book does, that a trans fat is technically a particular molecular configuration of a lipid structure. It's a triglyceride structure. And we're not going to get too technical and look at how it differs from the others. But here's the thing. That particular configuration of a triglyceride does exist in nature to a small degree, only in animal foods, eggs, dairy, and meat. We know that most of that trans fat structure that has been in our food supply in years past was that which was created in that laboratory setting that I just explained a short while ago. So when it was created in the lab, we realized it looked just like this one structure that was in animal foods. And as we saw certain health problems increasing in prevalence as trans fat was implemented and utilized, we suddenly started to recognize a correlation, and we realized that the more of this particular molecular structure that was ingested, the more dire the consequences. So since we cannot eliminate that structure from animal foods, our only choice is to eliminate the man-made version. And fascinatingly enough, science shows that the structure that is naturally present in animal foods doesn't seem to have quite the same ill effects as does the structure made in a lab, and that's probably because of some sort of difference since nature made one and man made the other. So again, trans fats are actually a configuration of a saturated fat, and we already know that excess saturated fats can be harmful to our health, so why have yet another means of getting excess? So that one is almost gone from the laboratory sense. And I say it that way because it takes time for laws to be implemented. It's difficult to enforce them, and there are always some small loopholes. And so there are certain products that are still getting away with their inclusion. So again, look over this, see if you feel like it's useful. So thinking back to what you learned earlier in the course with regard to the nutrition facts panel, remember when we are looking at the label line that shows us the total fat, that is the cumulative total of all kinds. So that should start making more sense to you now, right? So a serving size of 1 cup of this macaroni and cheese contains 12 total grams of fat. But who cares? What we care about is what types of fatty acids are making up our fat. So if we know that most of the fat in food is in the triglyceride form, then we know that our total fat is pretty much mostly triglycerides. And how much of those triglyceride structures in this macaroni and cheese are primarily saturated? Well, in 1 cup, 15% of the fat is in the saturated form, and we know the saturated form is a problem in excess. And we know that 15% means what? Significant. So a significant amount of a potentially harmful fat in 1 serving of food is an indication of an unwise choice. It's cheese. It shouldn't be a huge surprise. And if you took that a step further, when you buy macaroni and cheese, or even make it for that matter, isn't it usually made with pasta that is white? And we know that that means the flour used to make the pasta is a refined grain. So it's kind of a double whammy. There's nothing healthy about mac and cheese. We can also look at the cholesterol line, and again, we know we need none from our food, so the fact that there is any is not in our favor, and the fact that there's a moderate amount, 10% in a serving, is not great either since we need none. So we know that we want low amounts of things that are potentially harmful, so we would want our label to reflect 5% or less saturated fat, 5% or less cholesterol. And oh, by the way, look at that sodium. Whew, we're going to get to that one later. So here's a little interesting example for you. You and I, we walk into the store, we grab some things off the shelf, we look straight at nothing but that saturated fat, and we see that the serving of this product, one serving of this product contains 70% of the saturated fat you should consume in a day. Out of whatever 100% is, this is 70% of it in one serving. Probably not going to be healthy, right? Well, when you see that 43% of this product, sodium, almost half of what you should have in a day of your sodium is here, that's bad news. And you can see it has a significant amount of cholesterol. So this really has very little going for it, right? Do you have any clue what this is? Probably not. So here we have some refined white grain used with some shortening or lard or butter or something to make this pie crust with this creamy filling, which if it has 3 peas in there, I would absolutely be amazed that that was in the entire thing. So a creamy sauce in a pie crust is probably not an indication of a healthy choice. How about one more? You're looking here and you say a half a cup. That is not much at all. Provides half of the saturated fat, half of the tolerable upper limit for the day, 50%. Yeah, it doesn't have much sodium in it, but it has a high amount of cholesterol and half of the day's allotment of safe consumption of saturated fat in a teeny tiny amount. How many people eat a teeny tiny amount? And you know, the interesting thing psychologically is that's a small container, right? These come in those little containers. So when you eat more, you feel like you ate less, and that's what gets you. Take a breather. All right, on to the next thing. A protein, you learned in the protein chapter, often serves in the role of acting as a transportation vehicle for other substances in the body. So if a protein is the vehicle transporting a lipid, a type of fat, then it makes sense that when you put the word protein together with lipid, you get the word lipoprotein. So visually, I find that this analogy helps, and many of you may be too young to have ever seen the Jetsons, but maybe you've at least heard of them. The Jetsons was a cartoon that was a futuristic cartoon, and I believe it was 2020 when people were expected to be flying around in their transport vehicles instead of driving cars. So if you look at the passengers, those are the lipids. They're the ones being transported by the vehicle, and we can liken that to the protein. So in essence, you see a protein transporting a package of lipids. What kind of lipids are traveling throughout our bloodstream to our cells? The triglycerides. Remember, they came into our body in food form, they were broken down into component parts and reassembled into new triglycerides in the liver, and then we took in cholesterol potentially from food, and our liver produced more cholesterol. So in the liver, little packages of lipids, cholesterol and triglycerides are being formed, and then they are being sent out into the body's blood system on transport vehicles, which are proteins. Use some just common sense to rationalize yourself through this. Think about what the word density means. It means a lot of something in a small area. So the term is specifically referring to the protein aspect here. So if there is a low density, not a lot of protein, that implies there's a lot of lipid. And a lot is the same thing as excess. And excess cholesterol and triglycerides in the bloodstream are not good for health. When they leave the liver, the protein tends to travel to the blood vessels and drops off all these lipids, and then they don't know what to do with themselves, so they start not only adhering to the walls of the blood vessels, but digging in and making themselves a permanent part of that structure. And as they accrue, plaques form. So when you think, whoa, what could be causing lots of this lousy stuff, this lethal stuff, this LDL to form in my body? L is lousy, L is lethal, you get in the trend. Then you want to think of foods like sweets, treats, and greasy meats, and you want to always think animal. And you know that animal foods are largely comprised of saturated fats and cholesterol. So where there is an animal, there is likely a source of excess of both, and where you have a sweet treat or greasy meat, you tend to have one, if not both, in excess. So the high density lipoproteins, the HDL, the healthy, the happy, the high density, means there's a lot of protein and just a little bit of lipid. And they're great because after they leave the liver, they like to make a U-turn and head back. They say, hey man, I got some productive purposes to serve. Send me out to do an important job. One of their important jobs is to scavenge up some of that LDL that's floating around to keep it from preventing any problems. It's like a bunch of sketchy looking teenagers loitering around the streets, and they're the cops scooping them up and taking them back home to mom and dad before they can get in trouble. So how do you make sure you have a lot of good HDL? Well, you have to eat those healthy fats, but you got to do something else. Something that stimulates your liver to want to put more into the HDL packages. What lifestyle practice might encourage the liver to be more inclined to produce more of the healthy lipoproteins and fewer of the lousy ones? That's right, physical activity. So one of the best ways for people to change the lipid profile of their blood and to make it more favorable by increasing the good stuff, which inherently decreases the bad stuff, is physical activity. The power of exercise, and we usually say physical activity because exercise is a scary word with a stigma. Physical activity is movement. The power of it is immense. It's one of the most powerful medications out there. So when we're looking at why our most prevalent forms of preventable and premature disease and death are related to lifestyle, we're not just talking about diet, right? We're not just talking about what we eat. We're talking about what we do. And let's face it, culturally, we don't do enough and we eat very poorly. Hence, a high prevalence of otherwise preventable problems. Now, another visual for you. Everybody has different ways that they are better able to retain things, but you've heard me, and now you see this. The HDL is trying to get rid of the LDL, kind of trying to clean up the place, so we want more of it. A few more visuals. Again, remember, all these things are being assembled in the liver. Cholesterol is being made. Triglycerides are being assembled. Both of them are being packaged into lipid molecules and sent out into the bloodstream by way of protein transport vehicles to the cells of the body. The HDL like to pick up some LDL and head back to the liver, whereas the LDL like to linger and dig deep and embed themselves in the walls of our blood vessels, never to be removed. Let me say that again. Never to be removed. The formation of plaques in our blood vessels is permanent. There's no medication. There's no procedure that can eradicate or remove plaques. And we're going to talk about that more at a later date when we focus on cardiovascular disease. But hearing this now should be especially helpful. One more combination of visuals, whatever it is that helps you to reconcile the things that I am saying. Again, you can print this slide if it's beneficial. So, we're clinicians, right? We want to measure lipid levels in the body. So when you go and you have your blood drawn, we are assessing your biochemistry. Lipids are one of those chemicals, right? So we are looking at the lipids within the living organism, biochemistry. A lipid profile is specifically assessing the different types of lipid. So we're looking at your blood triglyceride structures that are able to float freely. Some actually aren't bound up into lipoproteins. And so there's a line for actual triglycerides, meaning those which float freely. The more of them floating around, the thicker your blood gets. The word we use is viscous. Something is thicker and more sludge-like is more viscous. V-I-S-C-O-U-S. You don't want viscous blood, right? You want it to swoosh right through your blood vessels. So higher blood triglycerides make for more viscous blood, which goes glug, glug, glug instead of swoosh. When we speak in terms of the high density and low density proteins, you know that those are package of lipids, both triglycerides and cholesterol bound up together. And now you understand why we want very little or a low amount of low density lipoproteins and a lot or a high amount of high density lipoproteins. Visually, what I want to make sure you understand is that on a lipid profile, a blood test result drawn by a physician, or a lab per physician order rather, you will see the category of total cholesterol, TC. It's a bit of a misnomer, and what that means is it's kind of the wrong use of the terms. It really should be changed to total lipids because that's the purpose that this term means to serve. It means the umbrella term for all three of these things combined. So your TC represents the combination of your LDL, HDL, and free-floating triglycerides in your blood. You don't really care, though, about the total number. Much like the total fat in food, who cares about the total fat in your blood? We care what kind. Well, the only way that the total number is going to be higher than it should be is if there's too much of the lousy stuff, too much of the LDL, or too many of those viscous creating free-floating triglycerides. If the numbers are individually favorable, the total number will always be favorable. So let's say that somebody said, your total cholesterol is this, and they said, that's good. Then you know all the others are good. And all they told you is your total cholesterol is this and it's bad, then you know you've either got too many triglycerides free-floating and or too much of the LDL. See the logic? We're going to use this later. Don't get too overwhelmed right now. I'm just connecting the dots for you. So this is a true life blood test result. So this is a lipid panel you can see. And here is that TC, the umbrella, the total cholesterol, 270. High. You can see what the normal range would be. Normal is a relative term. Everybody's an individual. Some people's norm might be a slight variation, and that's why we look at trends. If something is consistently abnormal, but not so far from the norm, high or low, and it never really changes a lot, then maybe that's that person's norm. That's why it's so hard to draw one set of blood results and really know. You don't have a point of reference, right? This is why we want people to go for annual physicals and have their blood work done. Because then you can look at the numbers from year to year and you can see a trend, positive, negative, or stable. That's really the value, being able to compare apples to apples ongoing. So if all we had was this TC, this total cholesterol as being high, we know that that means there's too much of something that's a problem in excess. So we look over here and we go triglycerides are 85. They fall within the normal range. They're not the culprit. We go HDL, we know is part of the picture. It's 42. We want more than 39 because we want a lot, so it's fine. And then we drop down here and we go, here's that lousy stuff. Oh, it's high. We want less than 99, and this person's got 211. That's what's making this number up here high. How do they fix this? Well, they reduce sweets, treats, and greasy meats to reduce LDL production. And then they pump up that HDL production, since it'll scavenge up some of those LDLs by focusing on physical activity. And by focusing on the foods with the healthy fats, the muffas and the puffas, they are displacing the unhealthy foods and upping the fats that are more likely to be bound into HDL. That did not sink in. Pause, drag your cursor back, and listen again, but we will come back to this at a later date. So one more way just to visualize the same information using my umbrella analogy for you, if this helps you to process this any further. We're not going to dig into VLDL and all, because ultimately in real life we don't even concern ourselves much with that. All right. Take a deep breath. Let's continue. So I spoke of plaques building up in our blood vessels. The formal term for the synthesis of plaque within our vessels is atherosclerosis. Sclerosis, if you don't know, is a term that essentially refers to hardening. And athero is the term that tells us it's caused by plaque. Sometimes you will hear another word, arteriosclerosis, which is hardening of the blood vessels. That can be caused by excess of pressure, high blood pressure. So think about this for a second. If this is a healthy blood vessel with an open, narrow passageway that blood swooshes right through, everything's hunky-dory. If plaques are building up in this vessel, it is narrowing the passageway. Therefore, it is going to be harder for blood to flow. If blood can't flow freely, it can't deliver oxygen and nutrients to our cells. Therefore, the cells that make up tissues, that make up organs, are compromised, and there is ultimately organ deterioration, which results in organ malfunction, which results in diseases, whether it's heart disease, whether it's lung disease, whether it's blood vessel disease in the legs, and so on. By the same token, not only are these plaques narrowing the passageway, but they're kind of like pouring concrete in here. They're making the walls of this vessel very hard, very rigid. So when our heart beats and it ejects a burst of blood, which is what a heartbeat is, that force to go through this hole, this little narrow passageway, is going to have to be very significant for the blood to push its way through, because this vessel doesn't want to flex at all. An unrigid, unimpaired vessel will flex nicely. As that blood is forcing its way through that narrowed passageway, that's a lot of pressure on the walls, high blood pressure. Not only can that cause immediate problems like a stroke, but the more pressure on the walls, the more damaged they become. Guess where plaques like to settle down? Into damaged walls of vessels. So if you're familiar with the phrase a catch-22, it means something is cyclical. So high blood pressure can damage the interior of our blood vessels, causing plaques to form. And the formation of plaques can cause blood pressure, causing more plaques to form. Blood pressure means what? The pressure of the blood against the interior walls of the vessels. Where are your blood vessels? Everywhere in your body. So anytime your pressure is high, it's not high in one area. It's pressure that's high throughout the entire vascular system. So it is a form of vascular illness or vascular disease to have the condition known as hypertension, or more casually, high blood pressure. Anyone's blood pressure can go up momentarily. The point is that if somebody has a consistently high blood pressure, one that is above a dedicated norm, then they are deemed to have a condition known as high blood pressure or hypertension. that is a form of cardiovascular disease. And that form of cardiovascular disease leads to other forms of cardiovascular disease, such as DVTs, deep vein thrombosis, heart attacks, strokes, peripheral vascular disease. It can damage the vessels to the kidneys, resulting in kidney failure, and so on. Again, we're going to come back to this at a later date. So now you have some idea of what the book is talking about, and you have some idea of why lifestyle has such a significant role in both the development of preventable disease and therefore the prevention of lifestyle-related disease. We have a lot of power in our hands. So now, very briefly, I'm going to flip through these pages. Obviously, the Did You Know is requested on your assignment. You see these great visuals, very similar to the ones that I used, an explanation in written terms of triglycerides that will hopefully make a great deal more sense to you now. You can see that these unsaturated fatty acid chains are bendy. What a great word, right? But it works. And that the saturated are much more rigid. You can see the omega-3s and the omega-6s are bendy, so they are obviously a category of unsaturated fats. And again, it explains all of that in detail. There is some mention of trans fatty acids and that unique configuration I referred to, which is called the cis configuration, but I certainly don't expect you to be an expert in that. And then we get into the phospholipids, and hopefully what I explained to you helped you to understand this section. You can see it's very brief, and then the configuration of a sterol is quite different from a triglyceride or a phospholipid, and cholesterol, cholesterol, is the most common sterol. In other words, there are others, but we're not terribly concerned with them for our purposes here. It goes into the functions of fat in the body and food. It talks about the digestion and absorption, which hopefully is becoming more comfortable for you to walk yourself through, thinking in terms of the GI tract. And I do request on the assignment that you address these things right here in box 5.1, the functions of fat in the body, so it can really sink in. I did introduce it at the beginning of this lecture. You get over here and it starts talking about where we get our fats. So I have given you some visual representations and fabulous imagery in here that should match some of what is on your assignment. Some references to EPA and DHA you can skim over. And then when you get over here, you've got your practice pearl thinking about the different types of fats, and you've got this diagram that shows you those which are more saturated as indicated by the red or orange, and those which are less saturated as indicated by the green. And the smoke point topic of different oils is really not something that warrants a lot of discussion because most of that is misrepresented in the layman's literature. Most of us, unless we're deep frying foods, which is not a healthy choice regardless of the type of fat, aren't going to get our fats up to such high temperatures that it is truly problematic. And as always, if nothing else, the dose makes the poison. So how much fat are we consuming that has been exposed to high heat? Because the bigger issue there is probably that we are exposing ourselves to way too much fat, if that is some concern that would be legitimate. So again, everything in moderation means just fat. Everything in moderation. Recommendations for fat intake get a little detailed here. I don't need you to be overly worried about what percentage exactly you are looking at in terms of saturated fats and such, because you know how to read a label. You know how to look for 5% or less for serving, and you know that those are TOLs, and that's why you want a low amount. The AMDR, which you learned about previously, is referenced in our discussion board as well, so you'll be calculating that. And then when we get over here, let's see, we've got some of the strategies for modifying fat intake, some of which I have already casually referenced in the lecture, so you might see a little bit of repetition there. And clicking through, you see our label. You should be extremely comfortable with that at this point. Hopefully you feel really well equipped to utilize that tool and to teach others. And there is a section here on fat substitutes you can skim through. I believe, if I click back for a moment, this here, the westernized diet, is kind of referencing what I usually refer to as the SAD diet, the standard American diet, and it gives you a little insight into the fact that other parts of the world are becoming more westernized. Unfortunately, people still speak of, oh, the French don't have as many issues with heart disease, and look at the way they eat. Well, yes, they do now because they eat like us, right? We're talking about how they ate historically, not currently. When you look at the wellness concerns, you see this hot topic here, cardiovascular disease, and we're going to devote a lot of time to that at a later date. So I've probably given you more information this go round than you needed, but this is the most prevalent and preventable cause of premature death and disability in our society. So it warrants a lot of attention. And now, hopefully, it makes a great deal more sense to you. Cancer is definitely worth reading about because I'm not sure that most people know to associate the words fat and cancer. So verbally, let me just say this. Too much body fat is a factor in the development of many cancers, and we'll look at that later. Too much fat in the diet is correlated with higher incidences of certain cancers. So if you're reading things that say, oh, eating too much saturated fat won't cause heart disease, maybe some of their evidence supports that, but it doesn't mean it won't cause other problems. That's marketing for you, right? When people have an agenda to promote something, they leave out other information. And that's what critical thinking is all about. Being able to look at the big picture and not just have tunnel vision and focus so much on one thing that you forget about other things. Malnutrition is referenced here. Please do read that section. We are going to look at some illnesses associated with that at a later date. I believe it was mentioned in the beginning of the chapter in passing, which is where you would find the answer I was looking for, and it is referenced here again. Of course, you always end with this little nursing assessment, and most certainly, when you get to the chapter summary, you want to do that little thing where you quiz yourself, pick up where I left off, and leave you with this food for thought. And of course, as always, you are welcome to ask questions or to seek clarification. I hope this has not been too mind-blowing.